Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
Thank you so much for coming. My name is Amy Draves, and I'm pleased to welcome Dan Shapiro to Microsoft. He's here to discuss his book, Negotiating the Nonnegotiable: How to Resolve Your Most Emotionally Charged Conflicts. At Harvard, he's an assistant professor and is the founder and director of their International Negotiation Program. He has chaired the World Economic Forum's Global Agenda Council on Conflict Prevention and regularly conducts trainings for corporate and government leaders around the world. Please join me in giving him a very warm welcome.
Thank you. So thank you, and thank you to all of you for taking time out of your schedules to be here today. How are you? I must admit, this was the quietest room I've ever walked into. I was scared to death to even say, when are we starting? Sorry. Yeah. So no, it is an honor, really an honor to be here. I can tell you my children are extremely jealous that I am here, in a sense, at the home of the computing world. Just before we begin, a couple of thoughts. One, show of hands. In the past 6 months, how many of you have experienced an emotionally charged conflict? How many of you have experienced an emotionally charged conflict? And whose hand was not raised? Was your hand raised? Okay. Just to make sure. Good. So we are all human beings here in this. You can put your hand down now. It's like, yes, it was terrible. Yes. Got it. So my goal today is to share with you just the bare sketches of some research that we've conducted for the past 20 years, which really introduces a new paradigm, a new way to help you deal with the most difficult conflicts that are in front of you, whether at work, here at Microsoft, or at home in your own personal lives. But before we begin, let me just ask you one basic question. Does anybody in this room know what a poplar tree is? A poplar tree? Yes, you in the back, you were the first hand I saw. What is a poplar tree?
I know what they are. I don't know whether I'm good at describing them.
Okay. So I know what they are. I'm not very good at describing them. Are they big? Are they small?
Pretty big.
Straight.
Yeah.
Tall, straight.
Deciduous
trees, they tend to grow quite quickly. And few of us in this room would have much of any concern for what is a poplar tree, if it weren't for the fact that there was a single poplar tree that sat right at the border between North and South Korea. And each year, this little poplar tree would blossom and it would grow. And as it would grow, it would block the South Koreans' view of the bridge of no return, which was the conduit between North and South Korea. So each year, out would march a small team of South Korean soldiers, and they'd go to trim this tree so they could see that bridge, correct the security problem. And this was fine, year after year after year, until August 6th, 1976, when the usual team of South Korean soldiers go out to trim the tree. They're trimming for about 15 minutes, 10, 15 minutes. Along comes the lieutenant from the North Korean side, walks up to the lieutenant from the South Korean side, and by the way, this lieutenant from the North has a much larger team of soldiers behind him. He says to the lieutenant from the South, "You try and trim this tree, we are going to shoot. We're going to shoot." Sorry. Yeah. It's like, okay, fair enough. And anyway, and they literally chased away this South Korean team. However, this was a security concern, and it did not stop the South Koreans from trying to trim the tree. They come back about 2 weeks later, August 18th, 1976, now with a much larger team. South Korean soldiers, U.S. soldiers, and UN officials, and all there for the single purpose of what? Of what? You're like, I don't know, this is after lunch, okay? Yeah, trying to trim the tree, that's right. And they get there, and once again, they're trimming for about 10 minutes. Along comes that lieutenant from the North Korean side, now with a much even larger team, North Korean soldiers, walks up once again to the lieutenant from the South. "You try and trim this tree. We are going to shoot. We're going to shoot." And for those of you who remember what happened next, this did not stop the South Koreans from trying to trim this tree. And this situation turned into a bloody, bloody mess. There were a number of South Koreans who were injured and North Koreans. There were 2 U.S. soldiers, not just shot, decapitated, caught on camera, broadcast around the world. And we've felt what that's like in our recent world, the trauma that can induce. I was presenting this case fairly recently at my home institution at Harvard Law School. And after I was presenting this case to a group of international military people, business leaders, lawyers, and others, I was walking out of the room, innocently enough, and this one gentleman comes storming up to me. Face as red as you can imagine. "Shapiro," he says to me, "I don't think you understand. I don't think you understand." He says, "I was there. I was at West Point, the U.S. military college, at that point in time. I knew those boys who died. I knew their families." He says, "We were not just feeling grief at the loss of our soldiers." He says, "We were feeling utter humiliation at the way our boys died." And surprise, surprise, this situation now reaches the highest of the high in the United States, where then President Ford was faced with a very difficult decision. What do you do? And you are all leaders in this room. What would you do? And the president turns to one of his lead advisors, asks his advice. This lead advisor says, "You know what I think we should do, Mr. President? What do you think we should do?" The advisor says, "I think we should bomb the North Koreans." And the president thinks about it and ultimately decides that a more appropriate strategy would be to simply cut down this damn tree, So back to the scene now at the DMZ zone between North and South Korea. You now have 813 human power coming back to the scene. You have F-4 fighters, you have F-5 fighters, you have a 64-man armed platoon trained in Taekwondo, you have 3 B-52 bombers circling around overhead with the single purpose of what? Cutting down this tree. And do they do it? Yes. How long does it take? About an hour? Is there further incident? No. But as I was learning about and researching this situation, what struck me hard, this was literally almost World War III. I mean, literally almost World War III. And over what? Over a tree? And obviously, it's over much more than just a tree. But it begs a couple of fundamental questions. And these are the two we're going to really be focusing on today. Why do we get stuck in emotionally charged conflicts? And 2, how do you get out? If this conflict were between the United States and Canada over a tree between our borders, the two of us will just get together. How do we deal with this? And 5 minutes later, we're done. We have an answer. There's something unusual that comes into play when emotions start to come into our most important conflicts. And we're going to talk about that today. And more specifically, 2 big goals. So 1, what I'm going to do today is to explore why conventional approaches to negotiation, to conflict resolution, tend to be insufficient when dealing with emotionally charged conflicts. And 2, I'm going to share with you a powerful framework that I've been developing over the past 25 years that can help you boost collaboration. So this framework, what you're going to learn today is what I believe to be the fundamental mindset that traps us in difficult conflict situations, whether it's over there between North and South Korea, or whether it's here in the offices here at Microsoft. And 2, I'm going to also share with you 5 emotional forces that we found tend to pull us toward that dangerous mindset. If you become aware of these forces, you can counteract them. So let's start. Let me just give you the 30-second version of background about where these ideas come from. The ideas we'll be talking about are based upon my work literally now across the continents over the past 25 years, starting back during the transitional period in Eastern and Central Europe, building a conflict resolution program there for youth to help them move forward in an open society. Since then, I've been working with organizations of all kinds, grassroots organizations in conflict situations, all the way up to working with heads of state, CEOs of major organizations, and everything in between. And that is all true, but putting that aside, my greatest learning, and I can promise this and this only by the end of our time together, my greatest learning has come from negotiating with 3 of the hardest bargainers the world has ever seen. Let me show them to you. These guys, And I don't know if any of you have anything like these things in your own life. These are my children. And how many of you have children? Okay, and just to be fair, how many of you were a child at some point? Some of you still did not raise your hands. Don't go along with these computer stereotypes. Microsoft, oh, he's actually not a human. There are a couple of robots there. No, but these are my children. And the reason I show you this slide is to simply say that, yes, you are negotiating and dealing with conflict at work. Every organization has conflict. It's a natural part of organizational life. But just as true, you're negotiating and you're dealing with conflict at home. And the problem is this, the practical problem, emotionally charged conflicts. We all get into them, but if you don't deal with them well, they can damage your relationships, they can damage productivity, and they can damage your well-being. You start to feel stressed out, you get sick more often, and so on. The organization suffers. And it's a problem at home. It's also a big problem for any organization. And I believe this to be the true secret for an organization to go from good to great or from great to even better. Why? Let me show you this. Look at the organizational costs of conflict. This is just a small list I put together. One, you have the legal fees. People don't get along, or somebody doesn't like Microsoft, they sue. What are the other costs of conflict? You have the poor decision-making when I don't like you at work, you don't like me, and all of a sudden we're not focused on the content or the algorithm that we're supposed to be working on. I'm focusing on the fact that I want to sabotage you, you want to sabotage me. Think about all the time that is devoured to conflict. You and the other party negotiating, dealing with the conflict, the manager, the human resource people, you have the worker turnover. All of a sudden, your superstar players here start moving to one of those other superstar organizations, and you ask, well, what happened? Is it just about the pay? Probably not. You have the increased healthcare costs, you have the toxic corporate culture that can start to emerge, the reputational damage that becomes at risk. And what you'll notice here is that it's only that top line that typically gets into the financial spreadsheets. Legal. Everything else is a hidden cost of conflict. And to me, what this means is that this can become Microsoft's a core source of value expansion and growth. How can you deal with conflict most effectively? So, the typical approaches to dealing with conflict tend not to work very well when it comes to emotionally charged conflicts. So, what's your name? Piyush, what are we negotiating over? We're in a conflict, you and me. You hate me, I hate you. What are we in a fight over? It's a workplace conflict. What is it?
Could be anything.
Okay, it could be anything. And I say, no, it could be nothing. And he says, everything. Okay, you're driving me crazy. Okay, it could be nothing. Okay, when do we really... Say it again?
So when do we release the product?
Okay, and I say we need to release the product in the next 2 weeks because our competitors are going to get that thing out, or a similar product, we're going to lose our market. And you're saying you need another 2 months for your research division to go through the research. You know what, Hughes? I think you're nuts. Okay, my microphone agrees. So now, one way of us trying to deal with our conflict situation is to fight it out. I argue... Hughes argues, am I saying it correct? Hughes argues back, we're fighting. I fight, he confronts, I confront back. What's the problem with this? What's the obvious problem? It doesn't go nowhere, it goes downward. We spiral into conflict. Another way we can try and deal with our conflict is to avoid it altogether. So I say, you got to get this thing out in 2 weeks, and Piyush, he just sort of avoids the conversation. I walk away as well. Same problem. The conflict is still there. The negative emotions are still there between us. And in other words, there's still a huge cost to conflict. Third way we can deal with this conflict situation is to try to talk things out. And this is a standard approach in most negotiation trainings. You have a problem, just talk it out. So Piyush and I try to sit down, but underneath our conversation and our words, I still dislike Piyush. I don't trust him. I don't think he's working as hard as he should. Piyush is thinking I'm an abusive colleague, right? So as much as we try to talk things out, there still is this underlying problem that is there, an emotional problem. So how do you make sense of conflict? What's going on? What can you do? My argument, how do you deal with these conflicts? It has nothing to do with your behaviors, or very little to do with your behaviors. It fundamentally has everything to do with mindset. And what I would like to introduce you to is what in the book I call the tribes effect. Now, the tribes effect, I define it as a divisive mindset. All of a sudden, Pius and I might be best friends and colleagues, but we start getting into this charged conflict, and it becomes me versus you. Us, our division versus theirs. And this is the single deadliest challenge of conflict. It's a mindset problem. And I have, just to make, I don't want to go into detail on this now, but I've developed an educational exercise over time. I describe it in detail in the book. Initially, I had developed this for use in Eastern Central Europe. In Macedonia, when there was emerging conflict between the Macedonians and the ethnic Albanians, how do you help them see the nature of the emerging conflict between their sides? The exercise is called the tribes exercise. Let me give you the 1-minute version. I describe a variation of it that I did at Davos, at the World Economic Forum, several years back. How many of you have heard of the World Economic Forum? Okay, most of you. So this is an international organization, nonprofit, most known for its summit each January in Davos, Switzerland, in the mountains of Switzerland, where they bring together typically 30 or 40 heads of state, as well as leading executives, CEOs from the top 500 companies, civil society leaders, and so on. So I did this little exercise there. I divided our group of 45 people. We had a deputy head of state in our room. We had CEOs from Fortune 50 companies, venture capitalists, peace security experts. Divided this group up into 6 smaller groups. And I said to them, you have 50 minutes to create your own tribes and your small groups. And I had a set of questions that they needed to answer. I, in fact, even asked them, please dress up in your tribal outfits. So, they had balloons on their heads and crazy things like that. 50 minutes later, we come back into the room. You see these 6 different tribes sitting in the room. They feel like independent tribes. I welcome everybody back to the room, and all of a sudden, the lights go completely black in the room. And at this point, into the room bursts this intergalactic alien with bulging eyes, huge head, who says, I am an intergalactic alien. I have come to destroy the Earth. I will give you one opportunity to save this world from complete destruction. You must choose one of these 6 tribes to be the tribe of all of the tribes. You cannot change anything about your tribe or yours or yours or yours. And if you cannot come to agreement by the end of 3 rounds of negotiation, says this alien, the world will be destroyed. And out floats this alien. Just to fast forward a bit, 3 rounds later, boom, our world explodes at Davos. And I have run this exercise now dozens and dozens and dozens of times with leadership around the world, with Harvard students, MIT students, mid-career students, diplomats from all across parts of Asia, Australia, the Middle East, and various different parts there, and again, and again, and again, and again, boom, 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 boom. With but very modest exception, the world explodes again and again. And you ask, why? What's happening? And those leaders at Davos, they had some of the most brilliant minds. They had an incredible portfolio of experience negotiating serious conflict situations. And yet the world exploded. How do you explain that? That's the tribes effect. The moment they start moving into this realm, it's no longer all of us leaders working together. We're friends. It's now my tribe versus yours. And in the course of only 50 minutes, I can put people into such a mentality that they would rather explode that world than save it. Now think of your own lives. You're born with a particular religion or ethnicity or race or this or that, raised within that particular narrative. Even the very fact you are all Microsoft and you're not some of those other people down the street. Or you might be where do you work within Google? No, you don't know a side job? No, I was thinking about your competition. And no, I don't know if that, boy, this is all tape. Forget it. I'm out of here. Bye-bye. Thank you. Yeah. No, I was, you know what? I was scared to death coming here that I was going to do that slip. I even told somebody before, and I was like, oh, what if, because you're like the center of the earth. And I was like, I would not want to offend you. We're going to talk about this. I actually did that on purpose. We'll tell you why in a little bit. Yeah. No, it is identities. I did not do it on purpose. But how did you feel when I said that? How did you feel? How did you feel?
Surprised.
You felt surprised, and why?
Well, I thought you were prepared.
You thought, okay, fair enough. And anybody, how else did you feel? How else did you feel? How did you feel? Honestly, I can take it, maybe.
Well, I'm at Microsoft, so...
You are at Microsoft, this is true. I will validate that, yes.
And so I felt hurt.
You felt hurt. And this, my friends, is, let me move it forward. Because what we found is that there are, let's forget this for a moment, there are a set of forces that pull you toward that tribe's effect. Notice how I did do it by accident, but let me use this for real as a learning experience. There are a set of forces that pull you toward that us-them mentality. The 5 forces that our research has uncovered: vertigo, taboos, repetition compulsion, assault on the sacred, and identity politics. Let me flip to number 4 for a moment. Microsoft is a sacred concept. You have your entire sacred universe, with Bill Gates and all of those others as sort of, some of the central figures creating this organization. You have your sacred language. Just as I was walking down the hallway here, I was talking to one of you, and I said, what do you do? This gentleman, I don't know where you are now, you said, I do work on algorithms. That's a language. You have your own sacred language. You have your sacred community. And the moment I come in and I say, oh, Google, not Microsoft, boom, we're not together anymore. It took one sentence. It took not even I said goo. And I didn't even say Google. I was going to go goo, that's all it took, And you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to Google tomorrow. I'm going to do it in reverse tomorrow at Google. Okay. So, but that's all it took. And all of a sudden, we move from, hey, we're cool, we're friends, to this guy's a loser. I hate you. You've hurt my feelings. I'm, whatever. I won't go further. But that is the power of these things. I call them the 5 lures of the tribal mind. And these things so easily lure us toward that us-them thinking. You could feel it. Again, I didn't mean it to do it, but now you know it. Let me start backwards with number 1 there, vertigo. So vertigo, this is a concept that I've been building over the past 15 or so years. How many of you have experienced an emotionally difficult conflict, let's say in the past 2 months instead of 6? Most of you. Tell me if you can relate to this, all of you actually. Think about the last time that you got so emotionally consumed in a conflict that you could think of nothing else but that conflict situation. It could have been here at work. Today, Shapiro was here earlier. I can't stop thinking about him. I hate that guy. Whatever it is, but it might be something here at work with a colleague. And you start getting sucked into this spiraling emotional world that I call vertigo. And what happens, vertigo is powerful. You're here at work. You can't think of anything else. You go home at the end of the day, and there your beautiful family is with your kids. They come running up to you, Mommy, Daddy, we love you. And you see them. And yes, you are there in body. But where's your mind? Where's your heart? You're back here. And just as true, you can get into a conflict in the home setting. With your spouse, a family member, a difficult teenager, and you come to work, and yes, you are here in body, but you're not necessarily here in mind or in emotion. That's vertigo. It is like this spinning tornado. You're in the middle of the tornado with that other person. You cannot see anything beyond that tornado. Let me give you one example. I just was in D.C. the other day. I was reminded of a story that I'd heard a number of years back. There was a professor of mine, an English professor. During my first year of college, he shared a story. He and his wife were out shopping for a bedspread in the mall in D.C. And his wife thought that they absolutely needed this $500 bedspread. And this English professor, he thought this was the most foolish decision their family would ever make. And he says they start talking about this in the mall, and then arguing more and more and more and more, until they're screaming at one another. And then he says, just for a moment, my eyes averted those of my wife. And he said, I saw there was a circle of onlookers watching us. I had not noticed. And then he said, I looked down at my watch, and 20 minutes had passed. I thought it was 5. We were now late to meet our friends in the mall for lunch. This is vertigo. And we've all been there. You get so sucked into that spiral, you lose all track of everything else. How do you deal with vertigo? The short answer, the longer's in the book, but the short answer, be aware of it. And when you see that little tornado coming in your direction, ask yourself one simple question. Do I really want to go there? And sometimes you might decide, yes, I do. You have so offended me, Shapiro, that we want to go there now, and you all walk out, Other times you might think, you know what, I'm not sure I do. That's vertigo. Let's move on to the second of these lures. And to do so, we're going to do a little exercise. What I ask you to do now is to pair up with somebody beside you. And literally, please, everybody find a partner, preferably somebody you do not know. Find a partner, and if you do not have a partner, when our exercise begins, I'll try and humiliate you. So try and find a partner, please. And literally in 15 seconds. Anybody not have a partner? You do not have a partner. Anybody else? Somehow they're always in the front and the back. Great. Would you mind joining? What's your first name? Jesus. Okay, great. So here's what we're going to do. Okay, so your task now, let me preface this. Your task is not going to be an easy one. Okay? But that's okay. The purpose of our day is to learn. So here's what I'm going to ask you to do. Don't do what I'm going to ask you to do until I say go. I want to make sure you all understand the directions, okay, the instructions. So you've all paired up with somebody else. In just a couple minutes, you're going to be sharing 4 things with that other person who you're now partnered with. So here are the 4 things. So one, with our presidential campaign happening right now, you're going to be sharing your political leaning. Whether you're from the United States, I don't care. What is your political leaning if you were to vote in the United States? Are you Democrat? Are you Republican? Independent? Or something other? Second, human resources will kill me. I'm not going to have a major Microsoft revolt today. But what's your salary? And not what do you write on your tax reports, but what's your real salary, okay? That's 2. So you're sharing these 2 things with your partner. So, I am this is my salary. Third thing, how attractive do you think that other person is? So, and just to be fair, I don't want anybody's feelings to get hurt. So in this sense here, a 1 means, it's not like you're ugly, but, and a 10 is you are like the hottie of Microsoft, okay? So, and then the final one, what do you think the age is of this person? No, wait, let me tell you why this is cool. Because after the exercise, they then can share their age and you can find out were you right or wrong and in which direction. Good. Okay, so before we begin, any quick questions? Any questions? No. So let me make it clear. You will share these 2. So you share your own political leaning. You share your salary with the other person. Second 2 questions, you're saying to the other, I think you are, an 8 out of 10, a 6 out of 10, and I believe you are, 46 years old, whatever it is. Good. Any other questions before we, yes, sir?
Can you lie?
Can you lie? Who's your partner? Why do you need to lie? No. Let's break this down a little bit. Why do you need to lie? What's your thinking on lying? Why would you want to lie? People at Microsoft don't lie. Yes. Why?
I don't want to talk about one.
I'm sorry?
I don't want to talk about the first one.
The first one you're saying. So it's the first one that worries you the most. How many others does the first one worry you the most? Wow, you're okay. Maybe almost one. Okay, so I'm scared. Okay, so political leaning. So can you lie? I leave that to your discretion. You know, I suppose probably not would be a good answer, but that's your choice. Anybody else before we go on with this exercise? Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Who goes first?
Who goes first? You know, just yesterday I was trying a version of this out, and I said I don't care, and my son breaks in. My 8-year-old son was there at my talk, and he says, just do rocks, paper, scissors. So you can choose who goes first, but you're going to have about 1 minute total to do it. Any other questions before we begin? Yes?
What's the point of this exercise?
What's the point of this? To learn. Yes. And any other questions before we begin? Yes, a lot of questions.
1, 2, 2, or is it 1, 2, 3, 4, and then...
Wait, sorry. Is it, what order can you put those in? Can I ask how you feeling right now? The arms are crossed. What's your name?
Bartek.
Bartek. How you feeling?
Funny.
Funny, okay. Okay, and what do you mean by funny? Funny can mean like haha, or funny like awkward, or funny like...
Awkward, yeah.
Awkward, and why?
I don't know, because these are private questions, I would say.
These are private questions.
Yeah, somehow.
Yes? Yes or no? Yes. I mean, so what? Okay, fine. You know, you're all a community here at Microsoft. You know, so why care?
Okay.
No. So he's so easily persuaded. And if you could write a check for me afterwards, it's $10,000. It's okay. It's funny. Yeah. No. So, anybody else feeling a little uncomfortable with the exercise? Yeah. And your hand was raised very quickly. And why? Let me take you out. Who else? Why? Yes. Why?
Anxious about the information that I'm going to share.
Okay, anxious about the information you're going to share. Let us go to that question of why are we going to do this exercise? And let me say one more thing. No, we're not going to do it. So you're off the hook. You can do this afterward if you so want, but it's not my responsibility. So why did I want you to experience this? This is taboos. Taboos are social prohibitions. These are big no-nos, things you're not supposed to say or do or feel. And in a conflict situation, these things tend to drive so much of the conflict. You could feel, I just put up 4 simple questions, and no, they're not simple. Why do I think that people feel uncomfortable with this? Because the moment you break a taboo, what happens? There often is a social punishment, right? Oh, so you think I'm an 8 out of 10? You know, no, and in fact, I just created this little exercise thing the other day, and I was there, and I told the group, we don't have to do it. They went, oh, and they really wanted to do it, oddly. So we're there at the reception afterward, and I didn't know they wanted to do it. We're at the reception afterward, and this one gentleman comes up to me and with a French accent, and he says, you know, I just have to tell you, we've all been doing your little exercise. And I was like, oh no, you know. And then he says, because he was struggling, and he's like, and I did not, and thank goodness my partner left. I didn't know what to say to this partner because, well, she was actually a 1, but I didn't know whether to call her a 10 or whether to call her an 8 so she wouldn't think that she's a 1 or 10. Like he was going crazy, you know. But this is taboos, social prohibitions. And they can be striking in a conflict situation. How do you talk about, let me give some example. So how do you talk about mom's drinking? You know it's driving so much of the dysfunction in the home setting, and yet nobody talks about it. How do you talk about the fact that, boy, dad never said I love you? And it just drives that relationship you have with him. And you know if you say it, you're going to feel demeaned on some level. It's not going to feel authentic anymore. It feels taboo to talk about. And it's just as true at work. Taboo drives so much of the dysfunction in a work context as well. You know, people who are leading somebody else, all of you here, I'm sure, what do you do when those beneath you do not give you the information you need because they're saying hushedly, quietly, don't share the information with the boss. She doesn't like or he doesn't like criticism. You know, you want that promotion? Don't share that information. How you can ever move forward to deal with and share information, make effective decisions if people do not talk about the core issues driving much of the dysfunction that's there. Even around racial and gender discrimination, people often say, yeah, we're dealing with that in our organization. And then you see after work, small sub-tribes of people saying, you know what? As much as they say they're trying to deal with this, boy, we have a long way to go. And yet it somehow feels taboo to actually talk about it. Taboos. And taboos don't just affect us in the work context, certainly in the international as well. So let me give you a quick example. In the book, there's more details. But this is but one of the ways we've used this with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. There are a huge number of taboos impeding effective communication between each side. 100 different topics. So a number of years back in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, we put together a group of Israelis, Palestinians, internationals, Tony Blair, who was then leading the quartet, and others, and we had a private session. And this group asked, well, what are the major taboos impeding effective communication? Do we want to just keep those taboos there and not talk about, in our situation, the salary or so on? Or do we want to start to break through some of those taboos, which makes sense to break through, to move you, so it's no longer me versus you, the tribes effect, but it's the two of us working side by side on our shared differences. That's taboos. My goal today, the purpose of that the previous exercise, I wanted you to feel it. So the next time you are in the office or at home and there's an issue that you know is there, but it's taboo to talk about, now you have a word. Wait a minute. Taboo. How are we going to deal with this? Should we be dealing with it? So, okay. Let's move on to the third of these laws, repetition compulsion. So the idea here is that in all of our lives, all of us sometimes tend to repeat the same dysfunctional patterns of behavior again and again and again and again. And you might go to a negotiation course or read a self-help book, and suddenly you come back that next day, I am a transformed person. For a week. Yeah. And then 2 weeks later, you're back to your same dysfunctional patterns of behavior. I have a good friend who has been involved in a very damaging, emotionally damaging relationship for years, more than 25 years. Literally about a month back, she finally decides, I've had enough, and she walks out of this relationship. And our whole family rejoiced. All of our friends rejoiced about this particular situation. And yet I had this underlying fear and discomfort about this thing called the repetition compulsion. Every day that this good friend was outside of that relationship, should I go back? Should I go back? Oh, I feel like I should go back, even though it was a torturous relationship. And I regret to say she did go back about a week and a half ago. But as one of my colleagues, now deceased, Paul Russell from Harvard Medical School, put it, you are like a mosquito drawn to that fatal flame. You know that you're not supposed to do this or be in this relationship or do this particular behavior with your loved one or here at work. And yet there's something almost feels instinctual, natural, to not do it. So, really quickly, and in the book I give the details on how you can break out of the repetition compulsion. Basic idea, 3 parts. So let's bring it down to 2 colleagues in the midst of a fight. You and a colleague back on your unit, in your area. What typically happens? Something triggers the conflict. They tell you you must get this project done within 2 weeks. They're pressuring you. They don't consult you or they exclude you in some way. There's some trigger. But then you start into this little dance, which I call the cycle of discord. And you say this, they say that, you do this, they say that, and it becomes the same pattern again and again and again and again. How do you break out of the repetition compulsion? Work to change any one of these nodes at all. Work to change any single one. And if you can change one, you break out of that little cycle of discord. Let me put this for you. Let's do this quickly. I think we still have about 7 minutes. Recall a conflictual relationship in your own life. It could be with your boss. It could be with a peer, with a romantic partner, a family member. You're not sharing this with anybody. But just bring that to mind. What I ask you is, what is your typical cycle of discord? When you and that other person get into tension, what does it look like? And let me give you it as simplistically as possible. Let's say my wife and I get into a conflict. So, well, we're in the middle of a house expansion right now. I just recently got back from the Middle East, walk home, and my wife says, oh, by the way, I talked to Don. We're going to be doing the kitchen as well, I think. Oh, really? So we're going to be, renovating the kitchen as well. We get into a conflict. Now, one way I could deal with that conflict is we just go at it. I attack, she attacks back. We get into the cycle. That's one cycle of discord. Another, I attack, you did what? And she looks at me just as you all looked at me when I said goo, and she goes, you're hopeless, Third way of dealing with the conflict is withdraw. She says to me, oh, we're going to be doing the house expansion. I go, what? And then we just simply walk away from one another. And the fourth, and this is the most paradoxical in a way, is that I'm the negotiation guy. I'm a problem solver. I like to collaborate. And I say, well, wait, you said what? You talked to Don? We're going to be doing the kitchen? Let's figure this thing out. That's collaborating. However, what might my wife hear? She might hear, oh, here he is disagreeing with me once again, and she withdraws. And the moment she withdraws, what do I feel? I feel rejected, emotionally rejected, and yet at the same time, her way of reacting is not negatively intentioned. She's just trying to get her emotional bearings. How did we break out of this situation? We realized this, and rather than my simply trying to problem solve immediately our situation, now what do? I say, you know what? Why don't we take a 10-minute break? Let's just try and get our heads together, and would you be open to coming back and let's talk about this? And she says, fine, and we're one step ahead now. But it's not easy to break out of that repetition compulsion. It pulls us toward it, even though we know we should not go toward it. And we end up in that tribes effect, in the us versus them way of thinking. So let's move on. You know what? We've talked about assault on the sacred. I've done it to you. So, but assault on the sacred, in short, let me just, it's an attack on anything that you believe is deeply meaningful to you. And as you saw today, it does not have to be about religion per se. It can be about anything that you hold deeply important. I've worked at Microsoft here for the past how many years? And you come in, speaker, and you call us that other organization? Come on. An assault on the sacred. How do you deal with an assault on the sacred? Thought we might, for sake of time, we'll close with this one. But let me just describe this to you briefly with an example. And what I ask you to do is listen carefully. So part of the work I do is working with hostage negotiators, working with crisis negotiators, and I thought we might think through an example based upon a real-life situation. Let me preface this by saying I was not there in the actual situation. I had learned about this situation through a training with the New York Police Department hostage negotiation team. But the basic situation, how many of you have been to New York City? Hands raised. That's almost, if not all of you. How many of you have been in the subway system in New York City? It's a lot of you. So this situation happened there. There was a gentleman clearly suffering from extreme mental illness. Most people who suffer from mental illness are not violent. According to the research, he was an exception. This gentleman was wandering around on the subway platform, just sort of wandering around. Now, as he's wandering around, he spots a woman about 20 years old carrying a baby in her arms. And he sees this woman. He runs up to the woman. He grabs this woman he grabs the baby out of her arms. He pushes the woman into the train track, runs off into the janitor's closet, locks the door behind him, and that is when the New York Police Department hostage negotiation team get there. They get there about 5 minutes later, and they hear behind this door, if this child is an angel, I love him. This child's a demon. You know what I have to do. If this child is an angel, love him. This child's a demon. You know what I have to do. And bang, open up in there. We're banging on the door. And does our approach work? Yes or no? Yeah. Does it work? Yes or no? No. No, of course not. We are approaching this situation like it is an interrogation. Banging on the door, you tell me what I need to know. And does that approach work well in hostage negotiation or interrogation? No. Does it work well even in a softer version in an office context? Not typically. And the situation just escalates. if this child is an angel. Love, this child's a demon, you know what I have to do. If this child is an angel, love, this child's a demon, you know what I have to do. What are you going to say now, hostage? And you go, what are you going to say? If this child is an angel, love, this child's a demon, I'm getting tired here, please, come on. What are you going to say? Somebody, what are you going to say? If this child is an angel, say it again. And say it again louder so everybody can hear. Angel. That feels good. This child is an angel. This child is an angel. And that is precisely what we said on this other side of the door. The child is an angel. The child is an angel. And did it work? What do you think? Yes or no? Did it work? Yes or no? Yes. Of course, of course, of course. Of course not. It did not work. Because all of a sudden, this gentleman on the other side of the door suddenly says, angel, 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 how do you know? How do you know? How do you know this child is an angel? You said there were 3 people on the other side of the door. How many people are really on the other side of the door? And all of a sudden, we had now made precisely the opposite error that we had made but 3 minutes ago in this room, and undoubtedly much longer for those real hostage negotiators. How do you deal with the sacred? 3 minutes ago, we're banging on the door in a sense, no listening, no inquiring, no learning, and totally tribes effect. Me versus you, and I'm going to tell you what you need to do. And yet, but 3 minutes later, we are way on this other side of appreciating the sacred, in a sense, over-appreciating, assuming we know more about what is going on in the mind of that hostage taker than he knows. And that is a dangerous place to be. Just to break it down, you come home, I come home after a long day of work. It's a Friday afternoon. There my beautiful wife is with our, taking care of our 3 kids all day. She opens up the door and my wife says to me, I have had the most frustrating day of my life with your 3 boys, And supposedly they are our boys, Now, if my response to my wife is, oh, honey, I know exactly how frustrated you are, I'm in trouble, I am over-appreciating. I am assuming I know more about what is going on in my wife's mind than she knows, and I'm in trouble. And here we were. And it wasn't until we went back to the very bare-bone basics of effective negotiation in a non-negotiable situation, listening, asking open-ended questions. 2 things. The hardest things to do in the world when you're in that tribes effect. Talk to me. How can I help you? What do you want? And once we started to ask those questions, we started to learn. We started to learn about this gentleman's perspective. He was not crazy from his perspective. He was trying to save the world. Save the world from the demons, bring in the angels. And once we understood that, it completely changed our approach to the negotiation. Because now we could say, you know what? I hear you saying you're trying to save the world. And you know what? In our own small way here at NYPD, we're trying to save the world too. So why don't you open up that door and see if we can try and save this world together? And literally, 3 minutes later, that little door squeaks open, out walks that gentleman with baby in arms. But it is a challenge, and it is a true challenge when you are dealing with the sacred. How do you appreciate what the other side holds as sacred without feeling as though you're giving in on you're conceding your own beliefs, your own values? So let me just summarize where we've come. I'll leave the final of these elements of these 5 lores to either the Q&A, or if you want to read the book, it's in the book as well. If you don't want to read the book and you want to know about this 5th one, identity politics, simply watch our current presidential campaign. So with that, what are the big points? And by the way, let me just say, these pictures you're seeing here, these remarkable pictures. We just had an event 2 days ago in Washington, D.C., where we unveiled the reality of these 5 pictures by my kindred spirit, a good friend, Romero Brito, the artist. And he drew a picture to represent each of these 5 lores. That's what you're seeing there with each of these. So in any case, what are the big points to take away? 1, break out of that thing called vertigo. Don't let that tornado get you. 2, confront taboos. You may not talk about them, but at least recognize they are there. 3, know your repetition compulsions, those dysfunctional patterns you get into, and make a decision, do you want to go there next time with your colleague, with your spouse, or not? 4, appreciate what's sacred. Appreciate it. Don't depreciate what the other side holds as sacred. Create a positive identity is the 5th. And I want to make one final point about all of these things. So 2 final points. 1, the idea is that we often take courses on negotiation and so on, incredibly important. But the problem is if we don't deal with this mindset and all that is luring us toward it, no amount of negotiation skills or tools is going to get us over there to the communal mindset that you want here at Microsoft or within the departments at Microsoft. And how do you break out? Well, you want to try and break out of those 5 lures. And final point then. Final point, this is not a quick fix. Reality is not a quick fix. This takes work. It takes work to try to understand what are my repetition compulsions? Where is vertigo and so on? It takes work, but with work, I promise you, the amount of value you can extract is tremendous. The hidden value of conflict becomes the hidden power of conflict. So with that, let me say a huge thank you to all of you, and I certainly welcome questions then as well. So thank you. Thank you. Yes?
I assume that different cultures have different taboos.
Yes.
So how do you learn about culture, different taboos, the taboos from other cultures that you're dealing with, that you have to deal with, since then, like the ones that you put were all common to us, so we knew not to talk about them.
Yeah. No, it's a great question.
They seem to be unwritten as well.
They're typically, taboos are typically unwritten rules. That's absolutely right. No, I remember I was giving a workshop a number of years back when I was just starting my work in negotiation in the Arab Middle East. I knew very little about the cultures there at that point in time. I was doing a workshop, I described this in the book actually, and we're all very engaged. This was for a diplomatic audience, very engaged in the workshop. We're doing a role play in the front of the room, and then all of a sudden, a hush came over the room. And it was sort of like when I said goo, I was like, oh, that was the hush. And I knew something was wrong. We take a break soon thereafter, and one gentleman comes up to me and he says, I just want to let you know that you were sitting like this at one point in time, and the sole of your shoe was facing a member of the royal family. And I said, oh, this was a taboo. I had severely broken it, and I said, oh, what should I do? What should I do? And I said, I'd like to mention it afterward. He said, no, don't worry. We get back into the room, and I do. I start off by giving a heartfelt apology. I didn't mean to do it. Later that day, as we're closing up the program at the end of our time together, that same gentleman who told me about my faux pas, my taboo breaking, he turned to me and he said, I have to say, you are much too sensitive. But what I heard him say was, thank you. That meant something. So I don't think you can always learn taboos. I think there's so many cultures. In this room, I'd imagine we have 100 different kinds of cultures represented or more, and subcultures. You can't learn all. One thing that you can do, if you're working in a new culture, the way you said it was, I thought, great. Find a colleague who is in that culture, and for half hour over coffee, tell me all the unwritten rules. Oh, so I'm not supposed to shake hands with certain people until they extend their hand to me, or you're not supposed to put your foot up. What are the taboos? You can have that conversation. That's the conversation we had in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, around the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. At the same time, every one of us in this room, we're going to step on something at some point in time. So I think it requires an openness and the communication of genuineness as well. Question, yes?
So what if one of the taboos is you're not allowed to talk about conflict? You have to pretend that everything's going
Oh, well, welcome to our world. This is our world right now. Nobody's allowed to talk about conflict in most there's some families, some organizations where you're only supposed to have conflict, but in most situations, you're not. Again, looking back at the Israelis and Palestinian situation, it's taboo for either side, for many on either side, to simply sit down and talk with the other side. You're seen as a traitor to your own tribe, to your own people. So I think it often requires creating what in the book I call, based upon some other researchers, a brave space. Some sort of private, informal space where people can talk about some of those issues without the fear of social punishment. This is where, for example, at Microsoft or somewhere else, a small group who might feel that their salaries are unfairly lower than others, they might get together over coffee after work and say, you know what, let's just privately talk about this and figure out a plan. So there are ways of dealing with taboos without striking them at the core and just simply breaking them and, as I call it in the book, just tearing it down, you know. Yeah. But it takes work to try and think about those spaces. How do you create a brave space? Other questions? Yes, please.
Yes. Does negotiation mean avoiding conflict, like avoiding a fight? Because let's take anything in our history, like freedom, getting our freedom or getting an independence.
Yeah.
It always involves some sort of a fight.
Yes.
Do you think with your book or whatever we learn from this book, we can negotiate an independence?
Can you are you thinking of making yourself independent from Microsoft now? Okay, why not? No. Negotiation is not the answer to everything. Let me go to the extreme first of all in the other direction. I'm sensitive to this fact, but let me share it. About a half a year ago, I was in office hours with my students, and it's about 12:30 in the afternoon. This is a week after the Paris tragedy had happened, the theater tragedy. And a student comes in and she says, "Did you hear?" And I said, "Did I hear what?" And apparently there was a bomb threat on several buildings in Harvard Yard, including our building. And the students and I got into a conversation. Then what do you do? If God forbid, someone walks into a room with a gun there, you can't negotiate in all situations. At that point in time, the students, the consensus I got from them is, look, we should just storm this person. Yes, some of us will die, but some of us will live. You sometimes can't negotiate with some people. So I think negotiation is not the answer to everything. At the same time, even when you see the shifting terrain in Northern Ireland or in South Africa or the United States relationship with Great Britain, there's absolutely a lot of negotiation that's happening. In any war, there is negotiation that's happening often in parallel to the fighting that's happening. So I don't think negotiation is the answer to all of our problems. I think it's absolutely an underused resource in most conflict situations. If I had the final point, if I had the preference of killing having millions of people killed in Syria, or having people be able to talk it out and work it out at a negotiation table, which would I choose? Which is plausible. That's a whole other argument people will have to think through. But which would I choose? Absolutely. It's the talking approach and the listening approach. Yeah. So yeah. Other questions, thoughts, criticisms? Yes.
You've been saying that when people from different tribes talk to each other, they don't kind of enunciate their underlying beliefs, right? So that's part of this problem. I read a couple of years ago in Scientific American, they had this issue about how diversity is great. Mm-hmm. One of the articles was saying, like, when people talk to people from other cultures, well, they try to enunciate more. So I don't know, maybe the difference is that they describe when people try to cooperate, and you resist when they have a conflict.
Sorry, could you say it again? I don't quite understand the question.
Sorry. So my question is, so you've been saying that when the people from different cultures try to negotiate, they often don't, I guess, enunciate their
taboos.
Their taboos.
Yes.
So on. So the article I read a couple years ago, it's that like when people from different cultures work together, they try to be more explicit in what they say.
Yes.
So because they think that otherwise the other person wouldn't understand them.
Yes. Oh no, I don't disagree with that at all. I was saying that people there are always taboos that I might not know about in another group's culture. At the same time, when you have two cultures who are negotiating, and imagine what you're saying makes sense, that I might try to amplify some of my beliefs, you might try to amplify some of your beliefs so that they're there on the table in some way. I don't disagree with that at all. Yeah. Time for one more. Can you choose it? I don't want to choose. Now I feel like my favorites. The color purple. Okay, you're the winner here. Yeah.
Must be the local university here. But in terms of getting an understanding of where the conflict is going, the spiral effect, now what are the patterns or techniques, and do they differ based on, gender or age? Like I'm dealing with parents, a tough issue with them versus my spouse.
Yeah.
I didn't really get to where, okay, what's the patterns? Are there set patterns to deal with them to get winning situations for both sides? I understood the lures of the tribe effect, but what's now the solution or the patterns of resolving?
Well, no, that's great. So you're right. So the whole I gave you half of the book. I didn't give you the other half of the book. There's a whole other half of the book on what I call integrative dynamics. So what we talked about was how do you break out of the negative, that negative cycle. We did not talk, exactly your point, we did not talk about how do you move toward the positive. We touched upon it. And for sake of time, let me give you the simplest and best advice I know in a way. And how do you move toward the positive? It is to appreciate. As soft as this might sound to an engineering, research, Microsoft organization, perhaps, this is tough, hard, powerful, a tough thing to do. When you are in the midst of that conflict with somebody of the other gender or somebody of a different age or a culture, appreciate. And what does that mean? It means three things. I want to understand where you are coming from. I want to find the merit, the value in your perspective. And third, I want to let you know. And I could give you countless examples where we have applied precisely that little formula, both in international conflicts as well as in major multi-billion-dollar disputes between companies. And what it took to actually move things forward, one, they had to recognize we're in this us-them mentality, we need to break out. And two, let me try and appreciate your perspective to the extent that you feel appreciated, and heard and understood and valued. That's the moment that people go, not to stretch it further, but to me on an emotional level, what happens to conflict? It becomes an emotional stalemate. I don't agree with you, you don't agree with me. It's precisely at the moment that each of us most desperately wants appreciation. Appreciate me. You're thinking, appreciate me. Each of us wants the appreciation. But there's something so very strange in our human instinctual psyche that prevents either of us from appreciating the other at precisely that moment. I'm begging for the appreciation. You're begging. My wife is begging for it. That colleague is begging for it. No, I'm not going to appreciate you until you appreciate me. Good luck. But that, but as an end point then, what that means is you have power. You have a lot of power. Some people say, yeah, interesting stuff, but what if the other person is irrational? I don't believe most people are irrational. All it takes is one to try and listen a little bit more to that hostage taker or to that difficult colleague here within Microsoft. All it takes is one, and you can move things forward more productively. So with that, let me say a huge thank you to all of you. And by the way, you're all going to get an apology note from Dan Shapiro. Bless you all. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.